What if I told you that a single question about a stolen Ferrari would expose a web of corruption reaching the highest levels of the FBI? What if that question came from a pregnant woman who'd been secretly gathering evidence against her own husband while he was systematically abusing her? This is the story of Victoria Hayes Morrison, a woman who appeared to have everything: a millionaire CEO husband, a penthouse lifestyle, and a baby on the way. But behind the perfect facade was a nightmare of domestic violence, financial fraud, and a conspiracy that went all the way to the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When Victoria asked her husband about insurance fraud outside a Boston police station, she had no idea her FBI director father was watching through the glass doors. She had no idea that her husband's violent response would trigger an investigation that would uncover decades of murder, money laundering, and corruption at the highest levels of American law enforcement. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. Victoria wasn't just a victim. For months, while being abused and isolated, she was methodically documenting evidence, recording conversations, and building a case that would bring down an entire criminal organization. All while 8 months pregnant and fearing for her life. This is a story about courage in the face of impossible odds, about justice prevailing over power, and about how one woman's refusal to be silenced changed everything. Don't you dare embarrass me in there. Bradley Morrison's fingers dug into Victoria Hayes Morrison's arm as they approached the glass doors of the downtown police station. At 8 months pregnant, every step felt labored, but Brad's grip made walking even more difficult. She tried to shift her purse to create some distance, but his hold only tightened. "Brad, please," she whispered, glancing around at the other people entering and leaving the building. "You're hurting me." "I'm not hurting you. I'm making sure you understand how important this is." His voice carried that familiar edge that made her stomach clench. "This Ferrari represents $200,000. When we file this report, you smile, you nod, and you let me do the talking. Understood?" Victoria nodded quickly, her free hand instinctively moving to cradle her swollen belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her mother's distress. She'd learned not to argue with Brad when he got like this, especially not in public. The consequences at home were always worse when she challenged him in front of others. The police station buzzed with afternoon activity. Officers moved purposefully between desks. Phones rang constantly, and the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving brightness. Victoria had never been inside a police station before, and the institutional atmosphere made her feel small and exposed. Brad straightened his expensive suit jacket and approached the front desk with the confident stride that had made him successful in the tech industry. At 38, he looked every inch the millionaire CEO. Tailored clothing, perfect haircut, and the kind of smile that charmed investors and intimidated competitors. "I need to file a theft report," he announced to the desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "My vehicle was stolen from my driveway sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. Sergeant Martinez looked up from her computer screen with the patient expression of someone who'd handled thousands of similar reports. "I'll need some information from you, sir. Can I start with your name and address?" "Bradley Morrison. I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries." He paused, clearly expecting recognition that didn't come. "We're the primary contractor for the city's new traffic management system." "Address, Mr. Morrison?" Brad's jaw tightened slightly at being treated like any other citizen, but he provided their Beacon Hill address. Victoria remained silent beside him, trying to make herself invisible while supporting the weight of her pregnancy against the high counter. "And what type of vehicle was stolen?" "A 2024 Ferrari Roma, cherry red, license plate number." Brad rattled off the details with increasing irritation as Sergeant Martinez methodically entered each piece of information into her system. "Any security cameras on your property?" "Of course, but they were mysteriously malfunctioning last night." Brad's tone suggested this should be obvious. Victoria felt a cold spike of anxiety. She remembered Brad checking the cameras obsessively before they left the house, muttering about technical difficulties. Something about his explanation hadn't felt right then, and it felt even less right now. "We'll need to see the footage from your security system, even if it's not working properly," Sergeant Martinez explained. "Sometimes our tech specialist can recover data that appears corrupted." "I'm telling you, there's nothing to recover. The system was down. Brad's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby officers. Look, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with here. Morrison Industries has contracts worth $50 million with this city. I expect this investigation to receive priority attention. Sergeant Martinez's expression didn't change. Sir, every theft report receives the same professional attention, regardless of the victim's occupation. I'll need you to sign this initial report, and Detective Sullivan will follow up within 24 hours. Brad snatched the pen from her hand with enough force to make Victoria flinch. As he signed the document, she noticed his signature looked different somehow, shakier than usual. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she shifted uncomfortably. Is there anything else I need to know about this theft? Sergeant Martinez asked, her gaze moving between Brad and Victoria. Any unusual circumstances, anyone who might have had access to your property, anything that seemed out of place? Nothing, Brad said quickly. It was a random theft, probably some street criminals who saw an opportunity. Victoria opened her mouth to mention the strange phone calls Brad had been receiving lately, calls that made him pace and swear under his breath. But Brad's warning grip on her arm tightened, and the words died in her throat. Mrs. Morrison, do you have anything to add? Sergeant Martinez addressed Victoria directly, something in her tone suggesting professional intuition. Before Victoria could respond, Brad stepped forward. My wife is 8 months pregnant and exhausted. She was asleep when the theft occurred and has nothing relevant to contribute. The dismissal stung, but Victoria had grown used to Brad speaking for her. It was easier than risking his anger later. She started to nod in agreement when something made her pause. Sergeant Martinez was looking at her with genuine interest, waiting for her to speak for herself. It had been so long since someone had asked for her opinion, her perspective, her voice. The moment stretched uncomfortably as Victoria wrestled with the unfamiliar opportunity to be heard. She began, then felt Brad's fingers dig deeper into her arm. I was asleep, like my husband said. But even as she spoke, Victoria realized she was lying. She hadn't been asleep at midnight. She'd been awake, standing at the bedroom window, watching Brad in the driveway. He'd been on his phone, gesturing angrily at someone she couldn't see. After the call ended, he'd stood there for nearly an hour, just staring at the Ferrari. The memory crystallized with sudden, uncomfortable clarity. Brad had known the car would be gone. He'd been saying goodbye to it. If there's nothing else, Brad said, we need to contact our insurance company. This has been traumatic enough for my pregnant wife. As they turned to leave, Victoria caught Sergeant Martinez watching her with a concerned expression that felt familiar. It was the same look her father used to give her during their last conversation 3 years ago, right before she married Brad. A look that said, I see more than you think I do, and I'm worried about what I see. The automatic doors slid shut behind them, and Brad immediately released her arm. Victoria rubbed the spot where his fingers had been, knowing there would be bruises tomorrow. There always were. That went well, Brad said, but his voice carried an edge of anxiety she'd learned to recognize. The insurance will pay out within 30 days, and we'll have this mess behind us. Victoria stopped walking. The piece of the puzzle she'd been avoiding suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. Brad, she said carefully, you filed an insurance claim before we even reported it stolen, didn't you? His face went very still. What are you talking about? You called the insurance company this morning, before we came here. I heard you on the phone giving them the claim number. Her voice grew stronger as the truth became unavoidable. You can't have a claim number unless you already filed the report, but we just filed the police report now. Brad's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, calculation, and finally cold anger. They were standing on the sidewalk outside the police station, surrounded by people going about their normal Thursday afternoon business. But Victoria suddenly felt very alone. You need to be very careful about what you're suggesting, Victoria. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking a direct question. 8 months of pregnancy had given her time to think, time to notice patterns, time to see through the golden cage Brad had built around their marriage. Did you have the Ferrari stolen for the insurance money? The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming. Brad's open palm connected with her cheek with a crack that seemed to echo off the concrete around them. The force of it, combined with her shifted center of gravity, sent her stumbling backward. Victoria's hands flew to her belly as she lost her balance, her only thought to protect the baby. She hit the sidewalk hard, her hip and shoulder taking the impact as she curled around her unborn child. The busy street fell silent. Through the ringing in her ears, Victoria heard car doors slamming, footsteps running, voices shouting. Someone was calling for paramedics. Someone else was asking if she was okay. But all she could focus on was the terrifying stillness from the baby, who had been kicking so actively just moments before. "Ma'am, don't try to move. Help is coming." A gentle voice, female, professional. "I'm Detective Sullivan. Can you tell me your name?" Victoria tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. "The baby? Is the baby okay? The paramedics will check on both of you. Right now, I need you to stay still." Detective Sullivan's voice moved away slightly. "Sir, I need you to step back and keep your hands visible." "This is ridiculous." Brad's voice, angry but controlled. "My wife is pregnant and clumsy. She lost her balance. This is a medical situation, not a criminal one." "Sir, I witnessed you strike a pregnant woman. That makes this very much a criminal situation." Victoria managed to turn her head enough to see Detective Sullivan, a woman in her mid-40s with short brown hair and the kind of steady demeanor that suggested years of experience with crisis situations. She was standing between Victoria and Brad, one hand extended to keep him back. "I want to call my lawyer," Brad said. "That's your right. But first, you're going to step away from the victim and wait for my backup to arrive." The word victim hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd spent 3 years telling herself she wasn't a victim, that her marriage was just complicated, that Brad's controlling behavior was the price of financial security and social status. But lying on the sidewalk outside a police station, 8 months pregnant and reeling from her husband's public assault, the truth was impossible to avoid. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Victoria closed her eyes and tried to feel for any movement from the baby. Nothing. The stillness was terrifying. "Ma'am, what's your name?" Detective Sullivan knelt beside her, close enough that Victoria could see the badge clipped to her belt. "Victoria Morrison, Victoria Hayes Morrison." She'd kept her maiden name as part of her middle name. One small rebellion Brad had grudgingly allowed. Now it felt like a lifeline to the person she used to be before she became Mrs. Bradley Morrison. "Victoria, the paramedics are almost here. Can you tell me what happened?" Victoria glanced toward Brad, who was now flanked by 2 uniformed officers. He was speaking in low, urgent tones, probably explaining how she was unstable, how pregnancy hormones had made her irrational, how this was all a misunderstanding. "I asked him a question," Victoria said quietly, "about insurance fraud, and he hit me." Detective Sullivan nodded, her expression grim. "We're going to take good care of you, Victoria, both of you." As the paramedics arrived and began checking her vital signs, Victoria caught sight of something that made her heart stop. Through the glass doors of the police station, she could see a familiar figure emerging from the elevator. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of dark suit that spoke of federal authority. Her father, FBI Director Samuel Hayes. The man she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Not since their bitter argument about Brad. Not since he'd told her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The man who was about to discover that his estranged daughter was lying injured on the sidewalk outside a police station, struck down by the husband he'd warned her against. The man who was going to blame himself for not protecting her when she'd refused his protection 3 years ago. Victoria closed her eyes as the paramedics strapped her to a gurney, knowing that everything was about to change. The perfect life she'd built with Brad, the penthouse apartment, the social status, the financial security, was cracking apart like an eggshell, and there was no going back to pretending it had ever been perfect at all. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and FBI Director Samuel Hayes stepped into the police station lobby, his attention focused on the briefing folder in his hands. At 58, Sam Hayes had spent 35 years in law enforcement, the last 8 as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He'd seen enough crime scenes, enough violence, enough human cruelty to last several lifetimes, but nothing had prepared him to see his daughter lying on a gurney outside the building where he'd come for a routine terrorism task force meeting. "Director Hayes?" Detective Sullivan approached him as he stood frozen in the doorway. "Sir, I think you need to know, that's my daughter. The words came out flat, professional, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside his chest. Samuel Hayes had trained himself never to show emotion in public, never to give opponents or allies alike any insight into his personal vulnerabilities. But watching paramedics load Victoria into an ambulance while her husband stood in handcuffs was testing every rule he'd lived by. Yes, sir. Victoria Morrison. She was assaulted by her husband approximately 10 minutes ago. The attack occurred in full view of multiple witnesses. Sam forced himself to look at Bradley Morrison for the first time, the man who'd married his daughter despite Sam's explicit warnings, the man who'd convinced Victoria to cut contact with her family 3 years ago, the man who was now being read his rights for striking a pregnant woman on a public sidewalk. What's his status? Under arrest for assault and battery on a pregnant victim. We're waiting for the domestic violence unit to arrive for processing. Detective Sullivan paused. Sir, I have to ask, did you know about any prior incidents of abuse? The question hit Sam like a physical blow. Had he known? He'd suspected. Victoria's withdrawal from the family, her reluctance to visit without Brad present, the way she'd stopped expressing opinions in conversations, all warning signs he'd recognized but hadn't acted upon. He'd told himself he was respecting her choices as an adult. In reality, he'd been respecting his own pride more than his daughter's safety. No, he said quietly, but I should have. Through the glass doors, Sam could see the ambulance pulling away, taking Victoria and his unborn grandchild to the hospital. The grandchild he'd never met, might never meet, depending on how badly she'd been injured. Director, Agent Michael Thompson appeared at Sam's elbow. At 35, Mike had been Sam's right-hand agent for 3 years, handling sensitive cases that required both discretion and thoroughness. I just heard. What do you need? Sam looked at Mike, then at Detective Sullivan, then at Bradley Morrison, who was now arguing loudly with the arresting officers about his rights and his status as a prominent businessman. A plan began forming in Sam's mind. Not the kind of plan FBI Director Samuel Hayes would make, but the kind a father might make when his daughter's life hung in the balance. Agent Thompson, I need you to run a complete background check on Bradley Morrison and Morrison Industries. Everything. Financial records, criminal history, business associations, personal relationships. I want to know what he had for breakfast 3 years ago. Sir, Detective Sullivan interrupted, with respect, that level of investigation might compromise the assault case. Defense attorneys could argue personal bias. Detective Sullivan, Sam's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. How long have you been working domestic violence cases? 12 years, sir. Then you know that assault charges are just the tip of the iceberg. Men who hit their pregnant wives in public have been escalating in private for months, possibly years. If Morrison has been abusing my daughter, I want to know about it. If he's been committing other crimes, I want to know about that too. Sam pulled out his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 3 years. Victoria's mother, Margaret Hayes, his ex-wife, the woman who'd warned him that his job would cost him his family if he wasn't careful. She'd been right about many things during their marriage, and she'd probably been right about that too. Maggie? Her voice was exactly as he remembered. Warm, concerned, instantly alert to crisis. It's Sam. Victoria's been hurt. She's on her way to Massachusetts General Hospital. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Margaret Hayes had been a high school English teacher for 30 years before retiring. She'd taught hundreds of teenagers how to read between the lines, how to recognize when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. She would hear everything he wasn't saying. How badly is she hurt, Sam? I don't know yet. Brad hit her. She fell. She's 8 months pregnant. Each sentence felt like swallowing broken glass. I'm heading to the hospital now. I'll meet you there. Margaret's voice was steady, but he could hear her moving around, probably grabbing her keys and purse. Sam, how did you find out about this? I was at the police station when it happened. Right place, right time. Or wrong place, wrong time, depending on how you looked at it. If he hadn't been there, Victoria might have minimized the incident, might have gone home with Brad and pretended nothing had happened. But he had been there, and now there was no pretending. Agent Thompson approached as Sam ended the call. Director, I've got preliminary information on Morrison Industries. It's not good news. How not good? They're under active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for fraudulent reporting. 3 different government contracts are being reviewed for bid manipulation. And, sir? Mike lowered his voice. Morrison's personal finances are a mess. He's leveraged to the point where losing a single major contract could bankrupt him. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. A desperate man with a pregnant wife and mounting debts. A man who'd isolated his wife from her family, particularly from her father who happened to be the director of the FBI. A man who might see violence as his only remaining option for maintaining control. There's more, Mike continued. I ran Morrison's name through our domestic terrorism database, just to be thorough. He's not a suspect, but his name appears in connection with 3 different cases, always as a potential victim of threats, never as a perpetrator. What kind of threats? Anonymous emails threatening his family if he didn't pay various debts. Phone calls warning him about consequences for his business practices. Text messages suggesting harm might come to his pregnant wife. Mike paused. Sir, I think Morrison has been manufacturing evidence of external threats to cover his own criminal activity. Sam felt the familiar cold rage that had made him effective in law enforcement for 3 decades. Bradley Morrison wasn't just an abuser. He was a calculated criminal who'd been setting up Victoria as either a victim or a scapegoat for his own crimes. Detective Sullivan, Sam called out, I need to speak with you privately. They moved to a quiet corner of the station lobby. Around them, normal police business continued. Officers booking suspects, civilians filing reports, phones ringing with the everyday crises that kept law enforcement busy. Detective, in your professional opinion, how long do you think Morrison has been abusing my daughter? Detective Sullivan considered the question carefully. Based on what I observed today, and based on 12 years of domestic violence experience, I'd guess the psychological abuse started early in their relationship, probably during the engagement period. The physical abuse likely began when she got pregnant and became more vulnerable. 8 months ago. Yes, sir. Pregnancy often triggers escalation because the abuser sees the woman as more trapped, less likely to leave. It's also when many abusers start isolating their victims from family support systems. Something. Sam thought about the timing. Victoria had stopped calling home around the time she would have learned she was pregnant. Margaret had been hurt by the sudden silence, had assumed it was normal newlywed behavior combined with pregnancy hormones. They'd all assumed she was just busy building her new life with Brad. There's something else you should know, Detective Sullivan continued. When I asked Mrs. Morrison what happened, she didn't hesitate to tell me about the insurance fraud question that triggered the assault. In my experience, abuse victims often minimize or lie about what caused their injuries. The fact that she immediately identified fraud suggests she's been documenting his behavior. You think she has evidence? I think your daughter is smarter than her husband gives her credit for, and I think she's been planning something. Before Sam could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Massachusetts General Hospital. This is Director Hayes. Someone. Director Hayes, this is Dr. Jennifer Walsh at Mass General. Your daughter, Victoria Morrison, was just brought in by ambulance. She's asking for you. The words hit him harder than any testimony he'd ever heard in a criminal trial. After 3 years of silence, Victoria was asking for him, not for Brad's lawyers or Brad's money or Brad's connections, for her father. I'm on my way. As Sam ended the call, he made a decision that would define everything that followed. He wasn't going to the hospital as FBI Director Samuel Hayes. He was going as a father whose daughter needed protection and who'd failed to provide it when she needed it most. Agent Thompson, I want you to coordinate with Detective Sullivan on the Morrison investigation. Everything by the book, but nothing overlooked. I'll be at the hospital. Sir, should I inform the Bureau about your personal involvement in this case? Sam considered the question. FBI directors were supposed to recuse themselves from cases involving family members. They were supposed to maintain professional distance and avoid conflicts of interest. They were supposed to follow protocols designed to protect the integrity of federal law enforcement. But daughters were supposed to be able to call their fathers when they were scared, and fathers were supposed to protect their children from men who would hurt them. Not yet, Agent Thompson. Let's see what we're dealing with first. As Sam walked toward his car, he could hear Bradley Morrison still arguing with the officers. still insisting this was all a misunderstanding, still believing his money and status would protect him from consequences. Morrison had no idea that he just assaulted the daughter of the most powerful law enforcement officer in the United States. He had no idea that his victim's father had resources Morrison couldn't imagine, and a motivation that made those resources extremely dangerous. Most importantly, Morrison had no idea that his desperate gamble to maintain control over Victoria had just triggered a chain of events that would destroy everything he'd built his identity around. Sam started his car and headed toward the hospital, toward his daughter, toward a reckoning that was 3 years overdue. Massachusetts General Hospital's emergency department hummed with controlled urgency as Sam Hayes pushed through the automatic doors. The familiar institutional smell, antiseptic mixed with fear and hope, reminded him of too many crime scenes, too many victims who'd arrived at hospitals like this one because someone had chosen violence over humanity. But this time, the victim was his daughter. "I'm looking for Victoria Morrison," he told the registration clerk, showing his FBI identification. "She was brought in by ambulance approximately 20 minutes ago." The clerk's eyes widened slightly at the badge, but her professionalism remained intact. "Bay 7 through those doors and to your right. Dr. Walsh is treating her." Sam found Victoria connected to monitors that beeped steadily, IV lines running into her arm, a fetal heart monitor strapped around her swollen belly. Her face was pale except for the angry red mark on her left cheek where Brad's hand had connected. Her eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Sam could tell by the tension in her shoulders that she was awake and listening to everything around her. "Victoria?" He approached the bed carefully, unsure of his welcome after 3 years of silence. Her eyes opened immediately, and Sam felt his heart break a little at the relief he saw there. "Dad, you came." "Of course I came." He wanted to touch her hand, to offer some physical comfort, but wasn't sure if she'd welcome it. 3 years was a long time to be absent from someone's life. "How are you feeling? How's the baby?" "Dr. Walsh says we're both okay. The baby's heart rate is strong, and the fall didn't cause any bleeding or contractions." Victoria's voice was steady, but Sam could hear the underlying fear. "Dad, I need to tell you something about Brad, about his business, about the Ferrari, about everything that's been happening." Before Sam could respond, Dr. Jennifer Walsh entered the treatment bay. She was a woman in her early 40s with the kind of direct manner that came from years of emergency medicine. Her expression was serious as she reviewed Victoria's chart. "Mrs. Morrison, your vital signs are stable, and the baby appears unaffected by the fall. However, I'd like to keep you for observation for the next few hours, just to be safe." Dr. Walsh glanced at Sam. "Are you family?" "I'm her father, FBI Director Samuel Hayes." Dr. Walsh's expression shifted slightly, not impressed by his title, but perhaps more understanding of the complex situation she was dealing with. "Director Hayes, I need to speak with you privately about some additional findings from Mrs. Morrison's examination." Sam felt his stomach clench. What kind of findings? The kind that suggests today's incident wasn't isolated. Dr. Walsh's meaning was clear, even wrapped in medical discretion. Victoria's hand moved to cover her face. "Doctor, please, I can explain." "Mrs. Morrison, there's nothing to explain, and nothing to be ashamed of." Dr. Walsh's voice was gentle but firm. "Director Hayes, could we speak in the hallway?" Sam looked at Victoria, who nodded reluctantly. In the hallway, Dr. Walsh kept her voice low, but her words were devastating. "Your daughter has multiple injuries in various stages of healing. Bruises on her arms and shoulders consistent with being grabbed forcefully. A partially healed rib fracture that's at least 6 weeks old. Stress-related pregnancy complications that suggest ongoing psychological trauma." Dr. Walsh paused. "Director, this has been happening for months, possibly the entire pregnancy." Sam leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of every decision he'd made over the past 3 years. Every time he'd chosen to respect Victoria's independence instead of investigating his instincts. Every time he'd told himself that smart, capable women didn't end up in abusive relationships. Every time he'd believed his own pride more than his daughter's need for protection. "What can we do legally?" he asked. "I've documented everything for the police report. Detective Sullivan called to say she's on her way to take Victoria's statement. But Director, you need to know, your daughter is going to need more than legal protection. She's going to need emotional support, financial independence, and probably therapy. This kind of systematic abuse doesn't end just because the perpetrator is arrested. Through the glass doors, Sam could see Margaret Hayes hurrying down the corridor, her face etched with the kind of worry only mothers knew. Behind her, unexpectedly, was Emma Collins, Victoria's former colleague and closest friend, someone Sam remembered from happier family gatherings 3 years ago. Margaret called me, Emma explained as she reached them. I've been worried about Victoria for months. She stopped returning my calls, stopped meeting for lunch. Every time I asked her to do something without Brad, she had an excuse. Margaret embraced Sam briefly, the first physical contact they'd had in over a year. Despite their divorce, despite the career pressures that had driven them apart, she was still the person who understood his guilt better than anyone else. How is she? Margaret asked. Physically, she'll be fine. Emotionally, Sam trailed off, not sure how to explain the magnitude of what they were facing. Doctor, Walsh excused herself to check on other patients, leaving the three of them standing in the hallway like survivors of some natural disaster, trying to process the scope of the damage. I should have known, Margaret said quietly. When she stopped calling, when she stopped visiting, when she started making excuses for why Brad couldn't come to family gatherings, I thought she was just busy with work and pregnancy and marriage. We all thought, Sam interrupted. We all missed the signs because we wanted to believe she was happy. Emma Collins shook her head. I didn't miss the signs. I knew something was wrong, but every time I tried to talk to her about it, she'd change the subject or cancel our plans. And then Brad would show up at work events, always touching her, always speaking for her, always positioning himself between her and other people. Work events? Sam asked sharply. Victoria quit Morrison Industries 8 months ago, right after she got married. Brad said she wanted to focus on preparing for the baby, but Emma hesitated, then continued. I heard from mutual friends that Brad had been pressuring her boss to fire her. He claimed she was becoming unreliable due to pregnancy, that she was making mistakes that could cost the company clients. Sam felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest. She was forced out, systematically isolated from her professional network, from her income, from her sense of identity outside of being Brad's wife. Emma's voice carried the anger of someone who'd watched a friend disappear into an abusive relationship. Sam, I think she's been trying to find a way out for months. Some of the questions she asked me about employment law, about financial independence, about prenatal health insurance, she's been planning something. Detective Sullivan appeared at the far end of the corridor, approaching with the measured pace of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of domestic violence victims. Sam recognized the careful balance, moving quickly enough to gather evidence while emotions were fresh, but slowly enough not to traumatize someone who'd already been through enough. Director Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, Ms. Collins, how is Victoria doing? Stable, Sam replied. Doctor says she can give a statement if she's up to it. Before I speak with her, I need to update you on her husband's status. Bradley Morrison has been charged with assault and battery on a pregnant victim. He's being held without bail pending a dangerousness hearing tomorrow morning. Without bail? Margaret looked surprised. Massachusetts law is very specific about domestic violence cases involving pregnant victims. Additionally, Mr. Morrison's financial situation suggests he's a flight risk. Detective Sullivan glanced at Sam. Director, your agent Thompson provided some interesting background information. Morrison Industries is in serious legal trouble. Sam nodded grimly. How serious? Serious enough that Morrison might see his wife and child as either assets to be protected at all costs or liabilities to be eliminated. Detective Sullivan's blunt assessment hung in the air like a threat. We need to consider the possibility that today's assault was an escalation, not an isolated incident. Through the glass doors to Victoria's treatment bay, they could see her sitting up in bed, one hand on her belly, staring at the fetal heart monitor, with an expression Sam couldn't read. She looked young and vulnerable, but also determined in a way that reminded him of the little girl who'd announced at age 7 that she was going to be a lawyer who helped people when they were in trouble. I want to hear what she has to say, Sam said. Not just about today, but about everything that's been happening. Sir, Detective Sullivan said carefully, You should know that anything your daughter tells me might be used as evidence in criminal proceedings against her husband. And given your position with the FBI, there could be complications if this case becomes high profile. Sam considered this. Protocol demanded that he step back, let local law enforcement handle the domestic violence case, while federal agents dealt with Morrison's financial crimes. Protocol demanded that he avoid any appearance of using his position for personal reasons. But Protocol had already failed his daughter once. When she'd needed protection, Protocol had kept him at arm's length, respecting her privacy while she was being systematically abused. When she'd needed someone to see through Brad Morrison's carefully constructed facade, Protocol had prevented him from investigating the man his daughter was marrying. Detective Sullivan, I'm going to be very clear about something. I'm not here as FBI Director Samuel Hayes. I'm here as Victoria's father. Whatever she needs, legal protection, federal investigation, or just someone to hold her hand while she gives her statement, that's what she gets. Detective Sullivan nodded slowly. Understood, sir. Shall we go talk to your daughter? As they prepared to enter Victoria's room, Sam caught sight of a familiar figure through the hospital's main entrance. Agent Thompson, moving with the purposeful stride that usually meant he discovered something important. Director, Mike called out as he approached. We have a problem. Morrison made his one phone call from jail. His lawyer? No, sir. He called someone named Grace Morrison, apparently his mother. She's hired a private investigator and a crisis management firm. They're already working on damage control, claiming Victoria's injuries were accidental and that she's been emotionally unstable throughout the pregnancy. Sam felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Brad Morrison wasn't just fighting the criminal charges. He was preparing to destroy Victoria's credibility, to paint her as an unreliable witness who couldn't be trusted to tell the truth about her own assault. There's more, Mike continued. The private investigator Morrison's mother hired, he used to work for the Bureau. He knows our procedures, knows how we build cases, and he's already requesting Victoria's medical records, claiming Morrison needs them to defend against false accusations. Emma Collins stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. They're going to try to make this her fault. They're going to claim she's lying about everything. Not if we document the truth first, Detective Sullivan said grimly. Mrs. Morrison's statement becomes even more critical now. We need her version of events on record before Morrison's defense team can muddy the waters. Sam looked through the glass at his daughter, who was still staring at the fetal heart monitor with that expression of quiet determination. Victoria had been protecting herself and her unborn child for months, probably without any support or encouragement from the people who should have been helping her. Now it was time for her family to start protecting her back. Let's go hear what she has to say, Sam said. All of it. Dr. Jennifer Walsh returned to Victoria's bedside as the family gathered around her. The fetal heart monitor continued its steady beeping, a reassuring counterpoint to the tension filling the small treatment bay. Mrs. Morrison, before Detective Sullivan takes your statement, I need to discuss my medical findings with you. Dr. Walsh's voice was professional but kind. You have the right to have these injuries documented as evidence, but you also have the right to privacy regarding your medical information. What would you like to do? Victoria looked at her father, then at her mother, then at Emma. These were the people who tried to warn her about Brad, the people she'd pushed away to protect them from the truth about her marriage. I want everything documented, she said quietly. All of it. The bruises, the rib fracture, the stress complications. I want people to know what he's been doing to us. Her hand moved protectively over her belly. To both of us. Dr. Walsh nodded and began her clinical recitation. Patient presents with facial swelling and bruising consistent with being struck by an open hand. Additionally, I've observed bruising on both upper arms in the pattern, consistent with forceful gripping. X-rays reveal a partially healed fracture to the 7th rib, approximately 6 to 8 weeks old. Sam felt his hands clench into fists. 8 weeks ago, Victoria would have been 6 months pregnant. Brad Morrison had broken his pregnant wife's rib and somehow convinced her not to seek medical treatment. The rib fracture, Dr. Walsh continued, appears to have been caused by blunt force trauma, possibly from being pushed against a hard surface. Mrs. Morrison, do you remember how that injury occurred? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. I dropped a glass in the kitchen. Brad said I was being careless with his expensive dishes. He pushed me, and I hit the corner of the counter. Margaret Hayes made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Emma Collins reached over and took Victoria's free hand, squeezing gently. "Did you seek medical treatment at the time?" Dr. Walsh asked. Brad said it was just bruised. He said emergency rooms were for real emergencies, not for clumsy pregnant women who couldn't hold on to a water glass. Victoria's recitation was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who'd internalized her abuser's voice. "He bought me an ice pack and some over-the-counter pain medication." Detective Sullivan stepped forward. "Victoria, I'm going to record our conversation if that's okay with you. This will become part of the official police report." Victoria nodded, and Detective Sullivan activated a small digital recorder. "This is Detective Rebecca Sullivan, badge number 4791, interviewing Victoria Hayes Morrison at Massachusetts General Hospital on Thursday, September 1st, 2025, at 4:30 p.m. Mrs. Morrison, can you tell me what happened this afternoon at the police station?" Victoria took a deep breath and began. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if telling the truth was gradually giving her back pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed. "We went to file a report about Brad's stolen Ferrari, but while we were there, I realized he'd already filed an insurance claim before we reported it to police. When I asked him about it outside the building, he got angry. He told me to be careful about what I was suggesting." Victoria paused, touching her cheek gingerly. "Then he hit me, hard enough that I lost my balance and fell." "Had your husband hit you before today?" "Yes." The single word carried the weight of months of secrets. "The first time was about 7 months ago. I was organizing his home office, and I found some financial documents that didn't make sense. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts I'd never heard of, contracts with companies that didn't seem to exist. When I asked him about them, he said I was being paranoid and nosy." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. "That night, he grabbed my arms and shook me. He said marriage meant trust, and if I didn't trust him, maybe I wasn't ready to be a wife and mother." Emma Collins was crying quietly. Margaret Hayes looked like she was fighting the urge to drive to the jail and confront Brad Morrison personally. Sam felt the cold rage building into something that would require all his professional discipline to contain. "Can you tell me about other incidents?" Detective Sullivan asked gently. "The rib happened 6 weeks later. But there were other things. He'd grab my arms when he was angry, hard enough to leave bruises. He'd push me when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. He'd corner me against walls when he was making a point, standing so close I couldn't breathe properly." Victoria's clinical recitation was devastating in its matter-of-fact tone. "But it was never constant. He'd hurt me, then apologize and buy me something expensive. Jewelry, designer clothes, a new car. He'd say pregnancy was stressing both of us, that we just needed to get through these difficult months and everything would be better once the baby came." "Wash, did you ever consider leaving?" Detective Sullivan asked. "Every day." Victoria's honesty surprised everyone, including herself. "But Brad controlled all our finances. My name wasn't on any of the accounts, even our checking account. He said it was for tax purposes, that his accountants had set everything up to maximize our financial efficiency." Sam felt sick. "Victoria, you had your own job when you married him, your own income." "Not for long. Brad told my boss I was becoming unreliable due to pregnancy hormones. He provided examples of mistakes I'd supposedly made, projects I'd supposedly mishandled. My boss felt bad about letting me go, but Brad had documentation that made it look like I was becoming incompetent." Emma Collins looked up sharply. "Victoria, those were your projects. You never made those kinds of mistakes." "I know that now. But at the time, Brad showed me emails that looked like they came from my work account. Project files that looked like things I'd created. He said pregnancy brain was real, that I was making errors and not remembering them." Victoria's voice carried the bewilderment of someone who'd been systematically gaslit. "He was so concerned, so supportive. He said the best thing for the baby was for me to stop working and focus on my health." Detective Sullivan exchanged glances with Sam. "Mrs. Morrison, do you think your husband falsified documents to get you fired from your job?" "I know he did. I found the real versions of those emails on his laptop 3 weeks ago. None of the mistakes were mine. He'd created fake versions to show my boss, then deleted the real ones from my work account." Victoria looked directly at her father. Dad, I've been documenting everything for 2 months. Photos of bruises, copies of financial documents, recordings of conversations where he threatens me. Sam felt a surge of pride mixed with heartbreak. Where is this evidence? Hidden in Emma's apartment. I've been pretending to visit her for pregnancy yoga classes, but really I've been building a case. Victoria's voice grew stronger. I know about the fraudulent government contracts. I know about the money laundering through Morrison Industries. I know about the fake companies he created to funnel city funds into his personal accounts. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the fetal heart monitor. Victoria had just confessed to conducting her own investigation into her husband's criminal activities while he was systematically abusing her. Agent Thompson, who'd been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, the evidence you've collected could be crucial to the federal investigation, but I have to ask, how did you access your husband's financial records without his knowledge? Victoria almost smiled. Brad thinks pregnant women are stupid and technology challenged. He never changed his computer passwords after I moved in. He never suspected that the marketing executive he married might be capable of understanding financial fraud or corporate corruption. Dr. Walsh, who'd been monitoring Victoria's vital signs throughout the interview, held up a warning hand. Mrs. Morrison, your blood pressure is elevated and the baby's heart rate is climbing. I think we need to take a break. But Victoria shook her head. No, I need to finish this. I need people to understand that today wasn't random violence. Today was Brad realizing that I knew about the insurance fraud, that I was getting too close to the truth about everything he's been hiding. She looked directly at Detective Sullivan. The Ferrari theft was fake. Brad arranged it himself because he needs insurance money to cover the debts from his fraudulent contracts. When I figured it out and asked him about it, he knew his whole house of cards was going to collapse. Detective Sullivan nodded grimly. Mrs. Morrison, in your opinion, what do you think your husband would have done if this confrontation had happened in private instead of outside a police station? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving protectively over her belly. When she spoke, her voice was steady but chilling. I think he would have hurt me badly enough that I wouldn't be able to testify against him. I think he's been planning to claim I died in some kind of accident, maybe something related to pregnancy complications. He's been telling people for weeks that I've been unstable, that I've been having emotional problems. The room erupted in shocked voices, but Victoria held up her hand. 2 weeks ago, Brad took out a $5 million life insurance policy on me. He said it was to protect the baby if something happened during delivery. But the policy has a clause that pays double if my death is ruled accidental during pregnancy. Sam felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This wasn't just domestic violence. This was premeditated murder, planned and calculated by a man desperate enough to kill his pregnant wife to avoid prison. Victoria, he said quietly, you're not going home with him. Ever. I know, Dad. That's why I've been documenting everything. That's why I kept the evidence at Emma's apartment. That's why I asked him about the insurance fraud in public, where there would be witnesses. Victoria looked around the room at the people who loved her. I knew if I confronted him privately, I might not survive it. But I also knew I couldn't keep living with him, couldn't raise a child with a man who was planning to murder me. Detective Sullivan turned off the recorder. Mrs. Morrison, what you've just told us changes everything about this case. We're not just looking at domestic violence anymore. We're looking at attempted murder, insurance fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Emma Collins was staring at Victoria with a mixture of admiration and horror. Tori, you've been doing this alone for months. Why didn't you ask for help? Victoria looked at her father, then at her mother. Because I was ashamed. Because I thought people would ask why I stayed, why I married him after Dad warned me about him, why I didn't leave the first time he hurt me. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. Because I thought if I was smart enough to investigate his crimes, I should have been smart enough not to fall for his lies in the first place. Margaret Hayes stood up and carefully embraced her daughter, mindful of the IV lines and monitor wires. Oh, sweetheart, being smart doesn't make you immune to being manipulated. Being strong doesn't mean you can't be trapped. Dr. Walsh checked Victoria's monitors and frowned. I'm seeing some concerning changes in the baby's heart rate. Mrs. Morrison, I think the stress of this conversation is affecting your pregnancy. We need to focus on keeping you and the baby stable. But before anyone could respond, Agent Thompson's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, then looked up with an expression that made Sam's stomach clench. Director, we have a problem. Morrison just made another phone call from jail, this time to someone we can't identify. The number's registered to a burner phone. The call lasted 30 seconds, and all he said was, Plan B is now in effect. Victoria's face went white. Oh, God, Grace Morrison, Brad's mother. She's been helping him plan something. Detective Sullivan grabbed her radio. I'm calling for protective custody. If Morrison has accomplices on the outside, Mrs. Morrison could still be in danger, even with him in jail. As alarms began sounding and security personnel rushed toward Victoria's room, Sam realized that arresting Brad Morrison had only been the first move in a much more dangerous game. And somewhere out there, Brad's mother was implementing a plan that might put Victoria and her unborn child in even greater danger than they'd faced at home. The secure conference room at Massachusetts General Hospital buzzed with controlled urgency as Agent Thompson spread files across the table. Victoria had been moved to a private room under protective custody with 2 security guards stationed outside her door. Dr. Walsh had managed to stabilize both Victoria and the baby, but the stress of the day's revelations was taking its toll. Sam Hayes sat at the head of the table, officially recusing himself from the federal investigation, but unofficially coordinating every aspect of his daughter's protection. Detective Sullivan sat to his right. Her domestic violence case now expanded into something much larger and more dangerous. Morrison Industries is a shell, Agent Thompson began, opening the first file. What looks like a successful tech company is actually an elaborate money laundering operation disguised as government contracting. He spread out a series of financial documents. Over the past 3 years, Morrison has been awarded $57 million in federal and municipal contracts, traffic management systems, cybersecurity consulting, data analysis for city planning. But here's the problem. None of the work was ever actually completed. Emma Collins, who'd been granted temporary clearance due to her role as Victoria's evidence custodian, leaned forward. How is that possible? Wouldn't the cities notice if they paid for services they never received? They would if they were paying attention, but Morrison was clever. He targeted small municipalities with limited oversight capabilities, cities with understaffed IT departments who were grateful to have someone handle complex technical projects. Agent Thompson pulled out another document. He'd submit preliminary reports showing progress, request partial payments for equipment and personnel, then delay final delivery with technical excuses. Sam studied the paperwork, his law enforcement experience making the patterns clear. By the time city officials realized they weren't getting what they paid for, Morrison had already moved the money through multiple accounts and fake companies. The cities were left with partial refunds and legal bills that exceeded their original investment. Exactly. But Victoria's evidence shows us something else. Agent Thompson opened a laptop and displayed a series of email exchanges. Mrs. Morrison documented conversations where her husband was planning to blame project failures on cyber attacks, equipment malfunctions, and employee sabotage. He was setting up a victim narrative that would let him keep the money while avoiding criminal responsibility. Detective Sullivan frowned. How does domestic violence fit into financial fraud? Control and isolation, Agent Thompson explained. Victoria was the only person close enough to Morrison to notice the patterns. Her marketing background gave her the skills to understand complex financial schemes. If she'd remained employed and financially independent, she might have reported his activities months ago. Emma nodded grimly. That's why he worked so hard to get her fired. It wasn't just about controlling her. It was about eliminating the biggest threat to his operation. Sam felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The pregnancy wasn't just a way to trap Victoria emotionally. It was also a way to make her more dependent financially and less credible as a witness. There's more, Agent Thompson continued. The insurance policy Victoria mentioned? It's not the only one. Morrison took out policies on several key employees, all with clauses that pay extra for accidental deaths. And 3 of those employees have died in the past 18 months. The room fell silent. Detective Sullivan was the first to speak. 3 deaths? Car accidents, workplace injuries, medical complications, all ruled accidental or natural causes at the time, But now that we know Morrison's pattern, Agent Thompson trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Emma Collins looked sick. He's been killing people who could expose his fraud? We can't prove that yet, but we can prove that Morrison collected over $2 million in insurance payouts from those deaths, and that all three victims had access to information that could have exposed his criminal activities. Sam stood up and began pacing, a habit from his early FBI days when complex cases required physical movement to help his brain process information. So we're not just dealing with domestic violence and financial fraud. We're potentially dealing with a serial killer who's been using insurance policies as a murder-for-profit scheme. Agent Thompson nodded. And Victoria was going to be his biggest payday. The $5 million policy, plus the clause about accidental death during pregnancy, plus eliminating the person most likely to testify against him. It was the perfect crime. Except she's smarter than he thought she was, Detective Sullivan said with admiration. She documented everything, hid the evidence, and forced the confrontation in public where it couldn't be covered up as an accident. Before anyone could respond, Sam's phone rang. The caller ID showed the Massachusetts State Police. Director Hayes, this is Captain Rodriguez. We have a situation developing at your daughter's residence. Grace Morrison is there with a moving truck and what appears to be a locksmith. She's claiming she has legal authority to secure her son's property pending his release. Sam felt his blood pressure spike. Is she removing evidence? Unknown, sir. We've got units responding, but Morrison's attorney is on scene claiming his client's property rights are being violated by our investigation. It's getting complicated. I'm sending federal agents to assist. Treat this as a potential crime scene and don't let anyone remove anything until the warrants are executed. Sam ended the call and immediately dialed the FBI field office. This is Director Hayes. I need a full evidence recovery team at 1407 Beacon Street immediately. Potential witness intimidation and evidence tampering in progress. Emma Collins looked confused. Can Brad's mother do that? Can she just go to Victoria's house and take things? Detective Sullivan shook her head. Not legally, but that doesn't mean she won't try. And if she succeeds in removing evidence before we can stop her, it could seriously damage both the domestic violence case and the federal investigation. Agent Thompson was already packing up files. Director, I should get to the scene and coordinate with the evidence team. Agreed. Take Detective Sullivan with you. I want both the federal and state cases protected. Sam paused. And Mike? Grace Morrison isn't just Brad's mother. According to Victoria's evidence, she's been actively helping him launder money through fake charity organizations. She's not a grieving parent trying to protect her son. She's a co-conspirator trying to cover their tracks. As Agent Thompson and Detective Sullivan left for Victoria's house, Sam found himself alone with Emma Collins, the woman who'd been Victoria's closest friend, who'd provided a safe house for evidence, who'd tried to maintain contact when everyone else had been shut out. Emma, I owe you an apology. She looked surprised. For what? For not listening to you 3 years ago when you tried to warn us about Brad. Victoria told me you expressed concerns about him, but I thought you were just jealous of her success. Emma was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. Sam, I was 26 years old and fresh out of college. I saw red flags, but I didn't have the language to articulate what I was seeing. I just knew something felt wrong about the way he controlled her conversations, the way he positioned himself between her and other people, the way she started changing her opinions to match his. You were right, though, about everything. Being right doesn't help Victoria now. What helps Victoria is that she's survived this far, that she's documented everything, and that she's got people who love her ready to fight for her. Sam's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret, who was sitting with Victoria while the security team maintained watch. Victoria's asking for you. She says there's something else she needs to tell you about Grace Morrison, something she hasn't told anyone yet. Sam felt his stomach clench. After everything they'd learned today, what could possibly be left? Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. When Victoria was hiding evidence at your apartment, did she ever mention being afraid of anyone other than Brad? Emma's expression grew troubled. She mentioned Grace Morrison several times, but not as someone she was afraid of, as someone she was afraid for. What do you mean? Victoria thought Grace was another victim of Brad's manipulation. She said Grace gave Brad money whenever he asked, that she defended his behavior even when it was clearly wrong, that she seemed terrified of disappointing him. Emma paused. But now that I think about it, what if Victoria was wrong? What if Grace wasn't a victim, but a partner? Sam felt the case shifting again, becoming more complex and more dangerous. I need to get back to Victoria. She's got information we need, and time might be running out. As they walked back toward Victoria's room, Sam's phone rang again. This time it was Agent Thompson, calling from Victoria's house. Director, you need to know, Grace Morrison isn't just removing evidence. She's planting it. We caught her placing documents in Victoria's personal belongings that make it look like Victoria was embezzling money from a children's charity. Sam stopped walking. She's framing my daughter? Yes, sir. Professional quality forgeries designed to make Victoria look like a criminal who can't be trusted to testify against her husband. If we hadn't arrived when we did, these documents might have been discovered during a routine evidence search. What's Morrison's current status? Still in jail, but his lawyer is arguing for release pending trial. If these forged documents had been discovered, they might have been used to claim Victoria was an unreliable witness with her own criminal motives. Sam felt rage and fear warring in his chest. Grace Morrison wasn't just trying to protect her son. She was actively trying to destroy Victoria's credibility, possibly to set her up for criminal charges that would discredit her testimony. Mike, secure everything, every document, every piece of evidence Grace Morrison brought to that house. I want a full forensic analysis of anything she touched. Already in progress, sir. But Director, there's something else. We found a second insurance policy in Grace Morrison's name. She's the beneficiary on a $2 million accidental death policy for Victoria, separate from the one Brad took out. The implications hit Sam like a physical blow. Grace Morrison hadn't just been helping her son commit insurance fraud. She'd been planning to profit from Victoria's murder herself. Emma, Sam said quietly, I think we're dealing with something much worse than we thought. This isn't just one man abusing his wife. This is a family business built on fraud, manipulation, and murder. As they reached Victoria's room, Sam could see through the glass door that his daughter was sitting up in bed, holding her swollen belly and talking intently to Margaret. Whatever she was saying, it was making her mother cry. Sam steeled himself for whatever revelation was waiting. After everything they'd learned today, he wasn't sure he was prepared for more truth. But Victoria had been carrying these secrets alone for too long, and it was time for her family to help shoulder the burden. He pushed open the door, ready to hear whatever his daughter needed to tell him, knowing that each new piece of information brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the danger she'd been living with, and the danger that might not be over yet. Victoria looked up as Sam entered her hospital room, her face pale but determined. Margaret sat beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand and fighting back tears. The security guards remained visible through the glass door, a stark reminder that even with Brad in jail, the danger wasn't over. Dad, I need to tell you about Grace Morrison, Victoria began without preamble. She's not what she seems. She's not an innocent mother trying to protect her son. Sam pulled up a chair, Emma Collins sitting beside him. Victoria, Agent Thompson just called from your house. Grace was planting forged documents to make you look like a criminal. That doesn't surprise me. Grace has been forging documents for years. Victoria's voice was steady, but Sam could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She's the one who taught Brad how to create fake companies, how to launder money through charity organizations, how to manipulate financial records. Margaret looked shocked. Victoria, how do you know all this? Because Grace told me herself. She thought she was mentoring her future daughter-in-law in the family business. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. 3 months after I married Brad, Grace invited me to lunch. She said it was time I understood how the Morrison family maintained their lifestyle. Victoria paused, her hand moving protectively over her belly. Grace showed me financial records going back 15 years. Shell companies, fraudulent insurance claims, government contracts that were never completed. She was proud of what they'd built together. Sam felt sick. She confessed to criminal activity? She bragged about it. Grace said the Morrison family had been running sophisticated financial scams since before Brad graduated from college. She funded his education, his early business ventures, his entire lifestyle through insurance fraud and tax evasion. Victoria looked directly at her father. Dad, Grace Morrison has been claiming me as a dependent on her tax returns since I married Brad. She's been collecting government benefits meant for low-income families by listing me and the baby as people living in her household. Emma Collins stared at Victoria in disbelief. She's been committing welfare fraud using your identity? That's the least of it. Grace has been using my name and social security number to open credit accounts, take out loans, and establish business relationships. When I tried to check my credit report 6 weeks ago, I discovered I'm supposedly a co-owner of 12 different companies I've never heard of. Sam felt the investigation expanding exponentially. Victoria, why didn't you report this to the authorities? Because Grace showed me what happened to other people who tried to expose them. Remember Brad's former business partner, David Chen? The one who died in that car accident last year? Sam nodded. Agent Thompson had mentioned several suspicious deaths connected to Morrison Industries. David didn't die in an accident. Grace showed me photos of his car after she and Brad tampered with the brakes. She wanted me to understand what happened to people who threatened the family business. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the fetal heart monitor. Victoria had just confessed to having evidence of premeditated murder, evidence she'd been carrying alone for months while living with the killers. Grace killed David Chen? Detective Sullivan's voice came from the doorway. She'd returned from Victoria's house and was standing with Agent Thompson, both of them looking grim. Grace and Brad together. They made it look like mechanical failure, but Grace documented everything. She keeps trophies of their crimes, photos, video recordings, personal items from their victims. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. She has a storage unit filled with evidence of every fraud, every theft, every murder they've committed over the past 15 years. Agent Thompson stepped forward. Mrs. Morrison, do you know the location of this storage unit? Unit 47 at Secure Space Storage on Cambridge Street. Grace gave me the access code in case something ever happened to her. She said family members needed to look out for each other. Sam felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak as he watched his daughter systematically dismantling a criminal organization that had trapped her for years. Victoria had been gathering evidence not just of her own abuse, but of a decades-long pattern of fraud and murder. There's more, Victoria continued. Grace didn't just help Brad get me fired from Morrison Industries. She orchestrated it as part of a larger plan to isolate me from anyone who might help me escape. Emma Collins leaned forward. What kind of plan? Grace researched my entire family. She knew about Dad's position with the FBI, about Mom's connections in education, about our family's financial resources. She developed a strategy to make me too ashamed and too scared to ask for help. Victoria looked at Margaret. Mom, do you remember getting those anonymous letters about Dad's FBI cases? The ones that made you worry he was in danger? Margaret nodded. They came for months. That's part of why your father and I finally divorced. I was terrified something would happen to him, and the stress was destroying our marriage. Grace wrote those letters. She wanted to break up our family so I wouldn't have a stable support system to return to. She researched Dad's classified cases and used that information to make the threats seem credible. Sam felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Grace Morrison hadn't just been helping her son abuse his wife, she'd been systematically destroying Victoria's entire family network to ensure she had nowhere to run. The divorce wasn't your fault, Victoria continued, looking between her parents. Grace manipulated both of you using information she never should have had access to. She wanted me isolated, financially dependent, and too ashamed to tell anyone what was really happening. Dr. Walsh appeared in the doorway, holding Victoria's latest test results. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to discuss some concerning developments with Mrs. Morrison's condition. Sam felt his heart stop. Is the baby okay? The baby is fine, but Mrs. Morrison is showing signs of severe stress-related complications. Her blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and she's experiencing irregular contractions. Dr. Walsh looked around the room. I understand there are ongoing legal issues, but my patient's health has to be the priority. Victoria struggled to sit up straighter. Doctor, I need to finish telling them about Grace Morrison. If something happens to me before I can testify— Nothing is going to happen to you, Sam interrupted. You're safe here, And we have all the evidence we need to arrest Grace Morrison and anyone else involved in this conspiracy. Agent Thompson nodded. Mrs. Morrison, we've recovered the forged documents from your house. We have the financial records you provided through Emma, and now we have the location of Grace Morrison's evidence storage unit. We can build the case without putting additional stress on you and the baby. But Victoria shook her head weakly. You don't understand. Grace has been planning something for tonight. She called Brad in jail this afternoon and told him, Plan B is now in effect. I know what Plan B is. Detective Sullivan moved closer to the bed. What is Plan B? Grace has been paying someone at this hospital to monitor my condition and report back to her. If I went into labor or became seriously ill, Plan B was to create a medical emergency that would look accidental but would kill both me and the baby. Dr. Walsh looked shocked. Mrs. Morrison, are you saying someone on my staff is involved in this conspiracy? Grace showed me bank records. She's been paying a nurse named Patricia Williams $5,000 a month to keep track of high-risk patients who might be vulnerable to medical accidents. Sam was already reaching for his phone. Agent Thompson, I need immediate background checks on all medical personnel with access to Victoria's room. And I need Patricia Williams brought in for questioning immediately. Dad, wait. Victoria's voice stopped him. Patricia Williams isn't the only one. Grace has people in the police department, people in the court system, people in the hospital administration. She's been building a network of corrupt insiders for years. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Grace Morrison hadn't just been committing isolated crimes. She'd been operating a sophisticated criminal organization with tentacles throughout law enforcement, healthcare, and municipal government. Victoria, Sam said gently, I need you to focus on staying healthy and keeping that baby safe. Let us handle the investigation. But what if Grace's people are already here? What if Plan B is already in motion? Victoria's breathing was becoming labored, her stress affecting both her and the baby. Dr. Walsh checked the fetal monitor and frowned. Mrs. Morrison, I'm seeing signs of fetal distress. Your anxiety is affecting the baby's heart rate. Before anyone could respond, the lights in Victoria's room flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, but the sudden darkness sent everyone into high alert. That's not normal, Dr. Walsh said grimly. The power grid for this wing is on a separate circuit from the rest of the hospital. Sam felt his FBI training take over. Agent Thompson, get hospital security up here immediately. Emma, help Dr. Walsh monitor Victoria. Margaret, call 911 and report a potential threat to a federal witness. Through the glass door, Sam could see one of the security guards talking urgently into his radio. The other guard was nowhere to be seen. Where's the second guard? Sam asked Detective Sullivan. I don't know. He was here when we arrived. Detective Sullivan drew her weapon and moved toward the door. Victoria grabbed her father's arm. Dad, this is how they did it with David Chen. They created a distraction, isolated their target, then made it look like an accident during the confusion. Dr. Walsh was checking the medical equipment, which was running on backup battery power. The fetal monitor is still working, but if someone has sabotaged the electrical system, we could lose life support capabilities. Sam made a decision that went against every protocol he'd ever learned. We're moving Victoria to a secure location. Now. Sir, moving a patient in her condition could be dangerous, Dr. Walsh protested. Not as dangerous as leaving her here if Grace Morrison's people are in the building. As if summoned by his words, the missing security guard appeared in the hallway. But instead of approaching Victoria's room, he was moving away from it, speaking quietly into a phone that wasn't issued by hospital security. Sam drew his weapon and opened the door. Federal agent, stop right there. The guard turned, saw Sam's gun, and ran. Detective Sullivan immediately gave chase while Agent Thompson coordinated with hospital security to lock down the building. Dad, Victoria called out weakly. Grace said if Plan B failed, there was always Plan C. She never told me what Plan C was, but she said it would solve all their problems permanently. Sam felt a chill run down his spine. They'd stopped Plan B, the medical emergency designed to kill Victoria and her baby. But Grace Morrison was still out there, still planning, still determined to eliminate the one witness who could destroy her entire criminal organization. And now they were trapped in a hospital that might be filled with Grace Morrison's corrupt allies, with Victoria in labor and nowhere safe to run. The hospital corridor erupted in controlled chaos as Detective Sullivan's voice crackled through the radio. Suspect in custody. The security guard was carrying a syringe filled with what appears to be potassium chloride. Sam felt his blood run cold. Potassium chloride could cause cardiac arrest in both Victoria and her baby if injected into her IV line. Plan B had been literal murder disguised as medical emergency. Dr. Walsh, Sam said urgently, we need to get Victoria out of this room immediately. Director Hayes, moving her could trigger premature labor. She's already showing signs of stress-related complications. Dr. Walsh checked the fetal monitor again, her expression growing more concerned. The baby's heart rate is becoming erratic. Agent Thompson returned from coordinating the security lockdown, his face grim. Sir, we've identified 3 other hospital employees who've been receiving payments from Grace Morrison. We're bringing them in for questioning, but we have to assume she has more people we haven't identified yet. Victoria suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Something's wrong. The baby stopped moving. Dr. Walsh immediately began checking the monitors, her professional calm cracking slightly. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to try to relax. Stress can affect fetal movement, but panic will only make things worse. I can't relax. My husband tried to kill me this morning. His mother is trying to finish the job, and now my baby might be dying because of the stress. Victoria's voice rose to near hysteria before she forced herself to breathe deeply. I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. Emma Collins moved to Victoria's side, taking her hand. Tori, remember those breathing exercises from the pregnancy classes you told me about? Let's do those together. Margaret Hayes stood on the other side of the bed, smoothing Victoria's hair back from her face. Sweetheart, your father and I are here now. We're not going to let anyone hurt you or the baby. Sam felt helpless watching his daughter struggle. For 35 years, he'd been solving problems through federal investigations, tactical planning, and law enforcement resources. But he couldn't arrest Victoria's pain, couldn't investigate away her fear, couldn't build a case against the biological reality of a high-risk pregnancy. His phone buzzed with a message from the field office. Grace Morrison arrested at storage unit, attempting to destroy evidence. Multiple federal charges pending. Victoria, Sam said gently, Grace Morrison is in custody. She can't hurt you anymore. But instead of relief, Victoria looked more frightened. Dad, you don't understand. Grace isn't the top of this organization. She's middle management. The real power behind all this is someone with access to federal law enforcement databases. Someone who could find out about FBI investigations before they started. Sam felt the case shift once again. Victoria, what are you saying? Grace bragged about having a partner in federal law enforcement. Someone who warned her whenever investigations were getting too close. Someone who helped her stay one step ahead of the authorities? Victoria's breathing was becoming more labored. She said her federal contact was the reason the Morrison family had never been caught, despite decades of criminal activity. Agent Thompson looked at Sam with growing alarm. Director, if Grace Morrison has a corrupt federal agent feeding her information, then this investigation has been compromised from the beginning, Sam finished grimly. Mike, I need you to run a security audit on everyone who's had access to the Morrison Industries case files. Everyone. Dr. Walsh interrupted their conversation with urgency in her voice. Mrs. Morrison, I'm seeing sustained fetal bradycardia. The baby's heart rate is dropping dangerously low. I need to prepare for emergency delivery. No, Victoria said weakly. It's too early. The baby isn't ready. The baby won't survive much longer under this level of stress, and neither will you if we don't relieve the pressure on your cardiovascular system. Dr. Walsh was already calling for the surgical team. I need to get you to the operating room immediately. Sam felt panic rising in his chest. Doctor, is the OR secure? If Grace Morrison has people throughout the hospital, the surgical suite is the most secure area of the hospital. Multiple layers of access control, video monitoring, and medical personnel who've all been with this hospital for years. Dr. Walsh paused. But if you're concerned about security, I can arrange for FBI agents to observe the surgery. Do it, Sam said immediately. I want federal agents in that operating room. As the medical team prepared to move Victoria, Agent Thompson's phone rang. He answered it, listened briefly, then hung up with a troubled expression. Director, that was the field office. Grace Morrison is demanding to speak with you personally. She says she has information about a federal conspiracy that you need to hear before Victoria goes into surgery. Sam felt his instincts screaming warnings. It's a manipulation tactic. She's trying to delay the medical treatment. Maybe. But sir, what if she's telling the truth about having a federal contact? What if someone in our organization is trying to sabotage this investigation? Victoria grabbed Sam's arm with surprising strength. Dad, don't talk to Grace. Whatever she tells you will be designed to make you doubt the people trying to help me. She's a master manipulator. But Victoria, if there is a corrupt agent, then catch them after you save my baby. Victoria's voice was firm despite her physical distress. Dad, I need you to focus on being a grandfather right now, not an FBI director. Please. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly. Mrs. Morrison is right. The immediate medical crisis takes priority over everything else. Director Hayes, your daughter and grandchild need you here, not interrogating suspects. Sam made a decision that went against every investigative instinct he'd developed over 3 decades in law enforcement. Agent Thompson, handle Grace Morrison's interview. I'm staying with my daughter. As they wheeled Victoria toward the surgical suite, she looked up at Sam with fear and determination warring in her eyes. Dad, promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me during the surgery, don't let Brad or Grace anywhere near my baby. Promise me you'll fight for custody, that you'll protect her from them. Victoria, nothing is going to happen to you. You're going to be fine, the baby's going to be fine, and we're going to build a life together that doesn't include criminals or abusers. Promise me anyway. Sam felt tears threatening for the first time all day. I promise, but I'm not going to need to keep that promise because you're both going to be fine. The surgical suite doors closed behind Victoria, leaving Sam in a waiting area with Margaret and Emma. For the first time since this nightmare began, he had nothing to investigate, no suspects to interview, no tactical decisions to make. All he could do was wait and hope that the daughter he'd failed to protect was strong enough to survive the consequences of his failure. Margaret sat beside him, taking his hand in a gesture that felt familiar despite years of divorce and distance. She's going to be okay, Sam. Victoria's the strongest person I know. She got that strength from you, Sam replied quietly. If she'd gotten my genetics, she would have tried to arrest Brad Morrison herself instead of building a careful case against him. Emma Collins looked up from her phone. Sam, I just got a message from Victoria's lawyer. Brad Morrison's bail hearing has been moved up to tomorrow morning. His attorneys are arguing that his wife's hospitalization proves she's emotionally unstable and that her accusations can't be trusted. Sam felt rage building in his chest again. They're using her medical emergency to undermine her credibility? It gets worse. They're claiming that Victoria's accusations of domestic violence are part of an elaborate scheme to gain sympathy in divorce proceedings. They're saying she injured herself to frame Brad for assault. Margaret looked horrified. How can they claim that? There were dozens of witnesses. Brad's lawyers are arguing that Victoria deliberately provoked the confrontation in public, knowing her father would be there to witness it. They're painting this as a calculated performance designed to destroy Brad's reputation and business. Sam felt sick. Even from jail, even facing multiple federal charges, Brad Morrison was still finding ways to abuse his wife. He was turning her courage in speaking up into evidence of manipulation, turning her intelligence in gathering evidence into proof of criminal conspiracy. Emma, call Victoria's lawyer back. Tell him I want to testify at the bail hearing. I want to explain exactly what I witnessed this afternoon. Sam, Margaret said gently, won't your testimony create conflict of interest issues? Let the courts worry about conflicts of interest. I'm not going to let Brad Morrison walk free while my daughter is fighting for her life in surgery. Before Emma could make the call, Agent Thompson appeared in the waiting area, his expression troubled. Director, I've got updates from Grace Morrison's interview. You're not going to like what she told us. Sam steeled himself for whatever revelation was coming. Go ahead. Grace Morrison claims she has documentary evidence that someone in the FBI has been feeding information to criminal organizations for over a decade. She says this person has been taking payments to warn criminals about pending investigations, to delay search warrants, and to provide advance notice of planned arrests. Does she have proof? She says she has bank records, recorded phone conversations, and email exchanges. She's offering to provide everything in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Sam felt the investigation becoming exponentially more complex. If Grace Morrison was telling the truth, it meant the FBI had been compromised at a high level for years. It meant Victoria's case was just one small part of a much larger corruption scandal. Mike, what's your assessment? Is she lying? Agent Thompson was quiet for a moment. Sir, some of the details she provided about FBI operations aren't public knowledge. Either she's telling the truth about having a federal source, or she's had access to classified information through other means. Before Sam could respond, Dr. Walsh appeared in surgical scrubs, her expression unreadable. Director Hayes, I need to speak with you about your daughter's surgery. Sam's heart stopped. Is she okay? Is the baby okay? The surgery was successful. Victoria delivered a healthy baby girl. Both mother and child are stable. Sam felt tears of relief streaming down his face. Margaret was crying and laughing simultaneously. Emma Collins was hugging anyone within reach. Can we see them? Margaret asked. Victoria is still unconscious from the anesthesia, but the baby is awake and doing beautifully. She's small, 5 pounds, 2 ounces, but perfectly healthy for her gestational age. Sam felt something shift inside his chest, some fundamental reorientation of priorities and purposes. He was a grandfather now. Everything else, the investigation, the corruption scandal, even Brad Morrison's criminal trial, suddenly seemed less important than the tiny human being who was depending on him for protection. Doctor, when can Victoria see her daughter? She should be awake within the hour. And Director Hayes, your daughter asked me to tell you something before the surgery. She said to tell you that she's naming the baby Hope, because that's what you and Mrs. Hayes gave her when you came to the hospital today. Sam felt his composure finally crack. After 35 years of maintaining professional distance from personal emotions, after decades of treating family relationships as secondary to law enforcement responsibilities, he was crying in a hospital waiting room because his daughter had chosen to honor his presence in her darkest moment. Mike, he said when he could speak again, handle Grace Morrison's deal however you think best. Right now, I need to meet my granddaughter. Agent Thompson nodded understandingly. Sir, take all the time you need. The investigation will be here when you're ready. As Sam walked toward the recovery ward to meet Hope Hayes Morrison, the little girl who would grow up knowing her grandfather had fought to protect her before she was even born, he realized that Victoria had been right about priorities. Sometimes being a father and grandfather mattered more than being FBI director. And sometimes the most important victories happened not in courtrooms or interrogation rooms, but in hospital rooms where new life overcame violence, where hope literally emerged from darkness, and where families found ways to heal from years of pain and separation. The investigation would continue. Justice would be served. But right now, Sam Hayes was going to hold his granddaughter and tell her about the brave woman who had fought so hard to bring her safely into the world. The NICU at Massachusetts General Hospital was quieter than Sam had expected, filled with soft beeping from monitors and the gentle whoosh of ventilators. Hope Hayes Morrison lay in an incubator, tiny but perfect, her small hands curled into fists as she slept peacefully, despite the chaos that had surrounded her birth. She's beautiful, Margaret whispered, standing beside Sam as they watched their granddaughter through the clear plastic walls of the incubator. She looks just like Victoria did as a baby. Sam reached through the access port to gently touch Hope's tiny hand, amazed when her fingers reflexively curled around his. She's so small, but strong, said the NICU nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands. 5 pounds, 2 ounces is excellent for 36 weeks. Her lungs are fully developed, and all her vital signs are perfect. Dr. Walsh approached from Victoria's recovery room. Director Hayes, your daughter is awake and asking for you. She's still groggy from the anesthesia, but she's alert and stable. Sam reluctantly released Hope's hand and followed Dr. Walsh to Victoria's bedside. His daughter looked pale and exhausted, but her eyes were clear and focused. Dad, is she okay? Is Hope okay? She's perfect, sweetheart. Small but perfect. Do you want to see her? Victoria tried to sit up, wincing at the surgical incision. Yes, but first I need to tell you something I couldn't say before the surgery. Something about the evidence I've been collecting. Sam pulled a chair close to her bed. Victoria, you need to rest. The investigation can wait. No, it can't. Dad, I've been recording conversations for 3 months, not just with Brad and Grace, but with their federal contact. Victoria's voice was weak but determined. I know who's been feeding them information from the FBI. Sam felt his heart sink. Victoria, you don't need to. It's Deputy Director Harrison. The name hit Sam like a physical blow. James Harrison had been his second in command for 4 years. His most trusted advisor, the man who'd helped him navigate the political complexities of leading the Bureau. The man who'd had access to every classified investigation, every operational plan, every personnel decision Sam had made as director. Victoria, are you sure? I have recordings of Grace talking to him on the phone, bank records showing payments from Morrison Industries to shell companies Harrison controls, email exchanges where Harrison warns Grace about pending FBI investigations. Victoria reached under her pillow and pulled out a small digital recorder. I've been carrying this with me for weeks, terrified someone would find it. Sam stared at the device that contained evidence of betrayal at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. How long have you known? Since I found the first set of financial documents. Harrison's name was on bank transfers going back 3 years, but I couldn't prove he was actively working with them until I started recording Grace's phone calls. Dr. Walsh checked Victoria's monitors and frowned. Mrs. Morrison, your blood pressure is elevated again. This conversation is causing additional stress. I'm sorry, but this is important. Victoria looked at Sam with an intensity that reminded him of her mother during Margaret's teaching days, when she was determined to help a struggling student succeed. Dad, Harrison knew about the Morrison Industries investigation from the beginning. He's been feeding them information to help them stay ahead of federal charges. Agent Thompson appeared in the doorway, having returned from Grace Morrison's interrogation. Director, I need to brief you on what Grace Morrison told us. Mike, before you do that, I need you to place Deputy Director Harrison under immediate surveillance, discreetly but thoroughly. Agent Thompson looked shocked. Sir? Sam gestured to the recorder in Victoria's hand. My daughter has evidence that Harrison has been providing classified information to the Morrison criminal organization. I want him watched until we can build a case. Sir, if Harrison is compromised, he has access to our surveillance operations. He'll know we're investigating him. Victoria struggled to sit up straighter. Agent Thompson, Harrison doesn't know I have these recordings. Grace and Brad think I'm just a battered wife who accidentally stumbled onto their financial crimes. They have no idea I've been systematically documenting their entire operation. Sam felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak as he watched his daughter, still recovering from emergency surgery, methodically dismantling a criminal conspiracy that had taken years to build. Victoria, how did you manage to record Grace's conversations without her knowledge? Marketing background, remember. I know how to research target demographics, analyze communication patterns, and document competitive intelligence. Victoria almost smiled. Grace Morrison thought she was mentoring a naive pregnant woman. She had no idea she was confessing to federal crimes to someone who understood exactly what she was describing. Emma Collins, who'd been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. Tori, you've been carrying this alone for months. Why didn't you tell me what you were really doing? Because I couldn't risk anyone else getting hurt. David Chen died because he knew too much about Morrison Industries. If Grace or Harrison suspected you were helping me, you could have been next. Margaret sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. Victoria, you've been living with people who've committed murder, collecting evidence that could get you killed, all while pregnant and being abused. How did you survive that? Victoria looked toward the NICU where Hope was sleeping peacefully. I kept thinking about her, about the kind of world I wanted her to grow up in. I couldn't let her be raised by criminals, couldn't let her think that violence and fraud were normal family behaviors. Dr. Walsh returned with updated test results. Mrs. Morrison, I have good news. Your surgical recovery is progressing well, and the baby's latest assessment shows she's thriving. You should be able to hold her within the next few hours. Doctor, Victoria said carefully, I need to ask you about security protocols. My husband is in jail, but he has family members and business associates who might try to gain access to me or my daughter. We have security measures in place, But if you're concerned about specific threats, I'm concerned about Deputy Director James Harrison of the FBI, Victoria said bluntly. He's been working with my husband's criminal organization, and he has the kind of federal credentials that could get him access to this hospital. Dr. Walsh looked at Sam with alarm. Director Hayes, is your daughter's concern legitimate? Sam felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders again. As FBI director, he couldn't make accusations against his deputy director without solid evidence. But as Victoria's father, he couldn't risk his daughter and granddaughter's safety on bureaucratic protocols. Dr. Walsh, please implement maximum security protocols for both Victoria and the baby. No one gets access without my personal approval, regardless of their credentials or claimed authority. Agent Thompson was already on his phone, coordinating enhanced security measures. When he finished the call, he looked at Sam with concern. Director, I just spoke with the field office. Deputy Director Harrison has been asking detailed questions about the Morrison investigation. He wants to know Victoria's condition, her expected testimony timeline, and the location of evidence we've recovered. That's not unusual, Sam said carefully. He's my deputy director. He should be briefed on major cases. Sir, he's also been asking about witness protection protocols and federal custody procedures for high-value informants. Agent Thompson paused meaningfully. He specifically wanted to know if Victoria would be moved to a secure facility for her own protection. Victoria looked at her father with fear in her eyes. Dad, that's how they eliminated David Chen. Grace told me they convinced him to accept federal protection, then arranged for him to have an accident while in custody. The implications were staggering. If Harrison was working with Grace Morrison, he could use his federal authority to isolate Victoria under the guise of protecting her, then arrange for her to disappear before she could testify. Mike, I want Harrison's access to FBI databases suspended immediately. Claim it's routine security maintenance, but make sure he can't access any information about Victoria or this investigation. Sir, suspending a deputy director's access requires approval from me. I'm giving that approval. Sam's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. And Mike, I want Harrison brought in for questioning. Tonight. Before Agent Thompson could respond, Margaret gasped and pointed toward the corridor. Through the glass doors, they could see a familiar figure approaching. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour. Deputy Director James Harrison was walking toward Victoria's room with the confident stride of someone who belonged in the hospital, someone whose federal credentials would get him past any security checkpoint. He's here, Victoria whispered. Dad, he's coming here. Sam felt every protective instinct he'd ever developed as a father and law enforcement officer converge into cold, focused determination. Harrison had betrayed the FBI, betrayed his oath of office, and betrayed the trust Sam had placed in him for 4 years. But more importantly, Harrison represented a threat to Victoria and Hope, and Sam Hayes was not going to let anyone hurt his family ever again. Agent Thompson, arrest Deputy Director Harrison the moment he enters this room. Sir, on what charges? Sam looked at the digital recorder in Victoria's hand, then at his daughter who'd risked everything to gather evidence against a criminal organization, then at the NICU where his granddaughter was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her very existence had triggered a war between justice and corruption. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. And Mike? Make sure he understands that his crimes weren't just against the FBI. They were against my family. As Harrison approached the door, Sam stood up and positioned himself between the corrupt deputy director and the two most important people in his life. After years of choosing duty over family, of prioritizing career over relationships, of letting protocol prevent him from protecting the people he loved, Sam Hayes was finally ready to fight for what mattered most. The investigation had become personal, and James Harrison was about to discover that there was no more dangerous enemy than an FBI director whose family had been threatened by corruption from within his own organization. Deputy Director James Harrison paused outside Victoria's hospital room, adjusting his tie with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to wielding federal authority. Through the glass door, he could see Sam Hayes standing protectively beside his daughter's bed, and his expression shifted slightly, calculation replacing casual authority. Director Hayes, Harrison called out as he entered the room, I came as soon as I heard about Victoria's emergency surgery. How is she doing? Sam studied his deputy director's face, looking for signs of the corruption Victoria's evidence had revealed. Harrison appeared genuinely concerned, but Sam had learned over 3 decades in law enforcement that the most dangerous criminals were often the most convincing actors. She's recovering well, Jim. Both Victoria and the baby are stable. Thank God. When I heard about Morrison's arrest and Victoria's hospitalization, I was worried about her safety. Harrison's gaze moved around the room, taking in Margaret, Emma Collins, and Agent Thompson. I've been reviewing the Morrison Industries investigation, and I'm concerned we might be dealing with a larger conspiracy than initially suspected. Victoria watched Harrison carefully from her hospital bed, her hand resting on the digital recorder hidden beneath her blanket. Deputy Director Harrison, what kind of larger conspiracy? Well, Mrs. Morrison, your husband's financial crimes appear to be connected to several other cases we've been investigating. Money laundering operations, government contract fraud, possibly even organized crime connections. Harrison's tone was smooth, professional, reassuring. I think it might be best if we moved you and the baby to a secure federal facility until we can ensure your complete safety. Sam felt his suspicions crystallizing into certainty. Harrison was following the exact playbook Victoria had described, isolating witnesses under the guise of protection, then eliminating them once they were in federal custody. That won't be necessary, Jim. Victoria's safe here. Director, with respect, this hospital has already experienced one security breach tonight. If Morrison's associates are willing to infiltrate medical facilities, imagine what they might do to prevent Mrs. Morrison from testifying. Harrison stepped closer to Victoria's bed. I've arranged for a secure transport team to move you and the baby to a federal witness protection facility. You'll be completely safe there. Agent Thompson, positioned near the door, caught Sam's eye and nodded slightly. The arrest team was in position. Victoria looked at Harrison with the steady gaze of someone who'd been documenting lies for months. Deputy Director, how did you know there was a security breach tonight? That information wasn't released to the media or included in official reports. Harrison's confident expression faltered for just a moment. I was briefed by the field office, of course. Agent Thompson, Victoria said clearly, did you brief Deputy Director Harrison about tonight's security incident? Agent Thompson stepped forward. No, ma'am, that information is being held under strict operational security protocols. Sam watched Harrison's face as the trap closed around him. Jim, how did you know about the security breach? I must have misunderstood the briefing I received. Harrison was already reaching for his phone. Let me contact the field office to clarify. James Harrison, Agent Thompson interrupted, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. Harrison froze, his hand halfway to his phone. This is ridiculous. Sam, you can't seriously believe. I believe the evidence, Sam replied coldly. And I believe my daughter, who's been documenting your conversations with Grace Morrison for the past 3 months. Victoria pulled the digital recorder from beneath her blanket. Deputy Director Harrison, would you like to hear the recording from last Tuesday when you warned Grace about the pending search of Morrison Industries? Or perhaps the one from 2 weeks ago when you discussed the best way to discredit my testimony? Harrison's facade completely crumbled. The smooth confidence disappeared, replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered criminal. Victoria, you don't understand the complexity of federal law enforcement operations. Sometimes we have to work with unsavory characters to achieve larger objectives. Like helping them commit murder? Victoria's voice was steady despite her physical exhaustion. I have recordings of you discussing David Chen's death, Deputy Director. You knew Grace and Brad killed him, and you helped cover it up. Mrs. Morrison, Harrison said desperately, you're overwrought from surgery, confused by pain medication. You're not thinking clearly about what you think you heard. Agent Thompson, Sam interrupted, please read Deputy Director Harrison his rights and remove him from my daughter's room. As Harrison was handcuffed and led away, he turned back toward Sam with a mixture of anger and desperation. Director, this is career suicide. You're destroying the Bureau's reputation based on the word of an emotionally unstable domestic violence victim. The words hung in the air like acid. After everything Victoria had endured, after all the evidence she'd gathered, After the courage she'd shown in exposing a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy, Harrison was still trying to discredit her by calling her unstable. Sam felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Jim, my daughter survived months of systematic abuse while gathering evidence that's going to send multiple criminals to prison for decades. She's the strongest person I know, and her testimony is going to be the most credible evidence this bureau has seen in years. After Harrison was removed, the hospital room felt strangely peaceful despite everything that had happened. Dr. Walsh returned to check on Victoria's condition and announced that she was ready to hold Hope for the first time. "Are you ready to meet your daughter?" Dr. Walsh asked gently. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've been ready for 9 months." As the nurses brought Hope from the NICU, Victoria looked at her parents and Emma Collins. "I need to tell you all something before I hold her." Sam felt his heart clench. "Victoria, what is it?" "I'm changing her name. Hope Hayes Morrison feels wrong. Morrison is the name of criminals and abusers. I don't want her to carry that legacy." Margaret smiled through her tears. "What do you want to name her?" "Hope Victoria Hayes. She's going to carry our family name, the name of people who fight for justice and protect each other." Victoria looked at Sam. "Dad, will you help me with the legal paperwork to change both our names back to Hayes?" Sam felt tears flowing freely down his face. "It would be my honor." Dr. Walsh placed Hope in Victoria's arms for the first time. The tiny baby opened her eyes and seemed to study her mother's face with serious concentration. "Hello, Hope," Victoria whispered. "I'm your mommy. I fought very hard to keep you safe, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you grow up in a world where you're loved and protected." Emma Collins was taking pictures with her phone, documenting the moment when Victoria Hayes finally got to hold the daughter she'd risked everything to protect. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, touching Hope's tiny hand with wonder. Agent Thompson returned from processing Harrison's arrest. "Director, we've recovered additional evidence from Harrison's office, financial records, communication logs, and documentation of at least 6 other cases where he provided classified information to criminal organizations." "How extensive is the damage?" Sam asked. "Substantial. Harrison has been selling FBI secrets for over 8 years. The Morrison case was just the most recent example." Agent Thompson paused. "Sir, this is going to require a comprehensive review of every case Harrison had access to. It could take months to assess the full scope of the corruption." Sam looked at his daughter, who was gazing at her newborn daughter with an expression of complete peace despite everything they'd been through. "Mike, assign the corruption investigation to someone else. I'm taking family leave." Agent Thompson looked surprised. "Sir, my daughter just exposed a criminal conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of the FBI. My granddaughter was born during a federal investigation that nearly got them both killed. I think I've earned the right to spend some time being a father and grandfather instead of a federal law enforcement officer." Victoria looked up from Hope with gratitude in her eyes. "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I missed too much of your life because I thought my career was more important than my family. I'm not going to miss Hope's first months because I'm busy cleaning up the mess left by a corrupt deputy director." Margaret smiled at her ex-husband with an expression Sam hadn't seen in years. "Sam, that might be the wisest decision you've ever made." Dr. Walsh checked Victoria's vital signs one more time. "Mrs. Morrison, I mean Ms. Hayes, you and Hope should be able to go home in 2 or 3 days. Do you have a safe place to stay while you recover?" Victoria looked at her parents. "Mom, Dad, would it be completely impossible for me to stay with one of you while I figure out what comes next?" Sam felt his heart expand with joy. "Victoria, you and Hope can stay with me for as long as you want. We have a lot of catching up to do, and I have a lot of granddaughter spoiling to make up for." As the sun began to rise outside the hospital windows, Sam Hayes sat in a chair beside his daughter's bed, watching his granddaughter sleep peacefully in her mother's arms. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about federal investigations or criminal prosecutions or law enforcement responsibilities. He was thinking about Hope's first Christmas, her first words, her first steps. He was thinking about teaching her to ride a bicycle and helping her with homework and walking her down the aisle at her wedding someday. He was thinking about being the kind of grandfather who put family before career, who chose love over duty, who understood that the most important victories happened not in courtrooms, but in hospital rooms where new life overcame violence and hope literally emerged from darkness. The investigation would continue. Justice would be served. Brad Morrison and Grace Morrison and James Harrison would face the consequences of their crimes. But right now, FBI Director Samuel Hayes was exactly where he belonged, protecting his family, holding his granddaughter, and starting the process of healing relationships that had been damaged by years of choosing work over love. Hope Victoria Hayes slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her very existence had triggered a war between justice and corruption, unaware that her grandfather had just reorganized his entire life around her well-being, unaware that she was surrounded by people who would spend the rest of their lives ensuring she grew up knowing she was loved, protected, and valued. The perfect life Victoria had tried to build with Brad Morrison had been built on lies and violence. But the imperfect, complicated, beautiful life she was building with her family was built on truth, justice, and the kind of love that makes people willing to risk everything for each other's safety and happiness. 6 months later, Victoria Hayes sat in the witness stand of Boston Federal Court, holding Hope on her lap while she testified at Bradley Morrison's sentencing hearing. The baby was dressed in a pale blue outfit that brought out her bright eyes, and she was quietly playing with a soft toy while her mother delivered the most important testimony of her life. "Your Honor," Victoria began, her voice steady and strong, "6 months ago, I was a different person. I was isolated, financially dependent, and living in constant fear of the man I married. Today, I'm here as a single mother, a federal witness, and someone who has rebuilt her life from nothing." Judge Patricia Matthews nodded encouragingly. "Ms. Hayes, please tell the court how Mr. Morrison's crimes have affected you and your daughter." Victoria looked directly at Brad Morrison, who sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, no longer the confident CEO who'd once controlled every aspect of her life. He looked older, defeated, diminished by months in federal custody. Brad Morrison didn't just commit financial fraud and domestic violence. He systematically destroyed my sense of self-worth, my professional relationships, and my connection to my family. He made me believe I was incompetent, paranoid, and unworthy of love or respect. Victoria shifted Hope to her other arm, the baby gurgling contentedly despite the formal courtroom setting. But most importantly, he made me fear for my daughter's future. I realized that if I didn't find the courage to expose his crimes, Hope would grow up thinking that violence and manipulation were normal parts of family life. Sam Hayes watched from the gallery, sitting beside Margaret and Emma Collins. 6 months of family leave had transformed him from the constantly stressed federal director into someone who understood that granddaughter giggles were more important than budget meetings, that bedtime stories mattered more than briefing documents, that being present for first smiles was worth more than any career achievement. "Ms. Hayes," the prosecutor continued, "can you tell the court about the evidence you gathered against Mr. Morrison?" "For 3 months, while he was abusing me, I was documenting his crimes. I photographed financial documents, recorded conversations, and copied files that proved his involvement in money laundering, government contract fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." Victoria's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "I did this while pregnant, while being isolated from my family, while fearing for my life every single day." Defense attorney Charles Whitman objected. "Your Honor, Ms. Hayes was not a trained law enforcement officer. Her evidence collection methods were potentially illegal and—" "Objection overruled," Judge Matthews said firmly. "A domestic violence victim has every right to document the crimes being committed against her." Victoria continued, "I gathered this evidence not just to protect myself, but to protect other women who might become Brad Morrison's victims in the future. Men like him don't change. They don't get better. They find new targets and perfect their methods of control." Emma Collins dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Over the past 6 months, she'd watched Victoria transform from a frightened, isolated woman into someone who spoke at domestic violence conferences, who mentored other abuse survivors, who turned her marketing skills toward helping nonprofit organizations that supported women and children. "Your Honor," Victoria said, looking directly at the judge, "Hope will grow up knowing that her father was convicted of serious federal crimes. That's a burden she'll carry for the rest of her life. But she'll also grow up knowing that her mother fought back, that her grandfather reorganized his entire life to protect her, and that justice was served when powerful people tried to hurt innocent victims. Ahem. Brad Morrison's face was stone cold throughout Victoria's testimony, but Sam could see the anger in his eyes. Even facing 15 years in federal prison, Morrison still believed he was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy his life and reputation. Grace Morrison, who'd been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison 3 months earlier, was not present for her son's hearing. She'd been caught trying to bribe federal marshals to arrange Brad's escape during transport to a previous court appearance. The additional charges had added another 5 years to her sentence. Deputy Director James Harrison had been sentenced to 20 years for his role in the conspiracy. His fall had triggered a comprehensive review of FBI operations that was still ongoing, but Sam was no longer involved in that process. He'd officially retired from the Bureau to focus on family and to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest in the ongoing investigations. Ms. Hayes, Judge Matthews said gently, do you have any final statement you'd like to make before I impose sentence? Victoria stood up, holding Hope against her shoulder. The baby had fallen asleep during the proceedings, completely trusting in her mother's protection. Your Honor, I want to say something to other women who might be watching this case, women who might be living with abusive partners right now. Victoria looked toward the gallery, where several domestic violence advocates sat alongside her family. I know it feels impossible to leave. I know it feels like you have no resources, no support, no way to survive on your own. I know it feels like no one will believe you, that people will ask why you stayed, why you didn't fight back sooner. Her voice grew stronger and more passionate. But I want you to know that you are smarter than your abuser gives you credit for. You are stronger than you think you are. And there are people who will help you if you give them the chance. Victoria looked at her father, who was crying openly despite being in a public courtroom. I also want to say something to the law enforcement officers who might be handling domestic violence cases. Please remember that victims aren't looking for you to rescue them. We're looking for you to believe us, to document our injuries, and to hold our abusers accountable for their crimes. Judge Matthews nodded approvingly. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Morrison, please stand for sentencing. Bradley Morrison stood slowly, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the expensive suits he'd worn during his years as a successful CEO. Mr. Morrison, you have been convicted of domestic violence, assault on a pregnant victim, financial fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. These crimes represent a pattern of behavior that shows complete disregard for human life and human dignity. Hukram, Judge Matthews paused, letting the weight of the charges settle over the courtroom. Your abuse of your pregnant wife was particularly heinous, but your systematic destruction of her professional and personal relationships demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that this court finds deeply disturbing. Brad Morrison stared straight ahead, showing no emotion. Furthermore, your financial crimes weren't victimless. You stole millions of dollars from municipalities that trusted you to provide essential services. You defrauded taxpayers who expected their money to be used for legitimate public purposes. Judge Matthews looked directly at Morrison. Mr. Morrison, I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $14.7 million to the municipalities you defrauded. You are also ordered to pay child support for your daughter until she reaches the age of 18, and you are prohibited from any contact with Ms. Hayes or your child except through court-approved supervised visitation. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was announced. 25 years meant Brad Morrison would be nearly 65 years old when he was released. Hope would be 25, older than Victoria had been when she married him. Additionally, Judge Matthews continued, given the systematic nature of your abuse and the threat you pose to Ms. Hayes and your child, I am issuing a permanent restraining order that remains in effect even after your release from prison. As federal marshals prepared to lead Brad Morrison away, he turned toward Victoria for the first time during the proceedings. This isn't over, Victoria. 25 years isn't forever. Sam started to stand, but Victoria raised her hand calmly. Yes, it is over, Brad. By the time you're released, I'll be 47 years old with a successful career and a daughter who doesn't remember ever being afraid. You'll be an old man with no money, no reputation, and no power over anyone. Victoria's composure was absolute, her voice steady and confident. You spent 3 years trying to make me believe I was weak and incompetent, but I was strong enough to gather evidence against you while you were abusing me. I was smart enough to outmaneuver your criminal organization while pretending to be your submissive wife. And I was brave enough to testify against you in federal court while holding the daughter you'll never get to know. Brad Morrison was led away in handcuffs, and Victoria sat back down with Hope, who was just waking up from her nap. After the courtroom cleared, Victoria's family gathered around her in the hallway outside Judge Matthews' chambers. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Margaret said, carefully embracing both Victoria and Hope. "You were magnificent in there." Emma Collins was beaming. "Tori, you've helped more women than you'll ever know. Your testimony is going to be studied in law schools and domestic violence training programs for years." Sam approached last, his eyes bright with tears he wasn't trying to hide. "Victoria, I want to apologize for something." She looked at him with surprise. "Dad, what could you possibly need to apologize for?" 3 years ago, when you told me you were marrying Brad Morrison, I tried to convince you not to do it. I thought I was protecting you from making a mistake." Sam paused, looking at Hope, who was gurgling happily in her mother's arms. "But I wasn't trying to protect you from him. I was trying to protect my own pride from being wrong about someone." Victoria studied her father's face. "What do you mean? If I'd really been trying to protect you, I would have investigated Brad Morrison before your wedding. I would have used FBI resources to run background checks, financial audits, criminal history searches. Instead, I gave you my opinion and then walked away when you didn't take my advice." Sam reached out to touch Hope's tiny hand. "If I'd done my job as your father instead of protecting my ego as an FBI director, I could have uncovered his criminal activities before you married him. I could have saved you from 3 years of abuse." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then shook her head firmly. "Dad, you couldn't have saved me from my own choices. I chose to marry Brad despite your concerns. I chose to believe his lies over your warnings. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have listened to FBI evidence any more than I listened to your instincts." She shifted Hope to her shoulder and looked directly at her father. "But what you did do was show up when I needed you most. You were there when I was lying on the sidewalk outside that police station. You were there during Hope's birth. You took family leave to help me rebuild my life. You gave me the support I needed to find my own strength." Sam felt his heart expand with gratitude and love. "Dad, I don't need you to have saved me from Brad Morrison 3 years ago. I need you to be here for Hope and me now. And that's exactly what you've done." As they walked out of the federal courthouse together, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete safety. Not the false security of financial dependence or social status, but the real safety that came from being surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, who supported her choices, who celebrated her strength instead of trying to control it. Hope babbled contentedly as they walked, reaching out to touch the autumn sunshine streaming through the courthouse windows. She was 6 months old now, sitting up on her own, laughing at everything her grandfather did, and completely unaware that she'd just witnessed her father being sentenced to federal prison. "So what's next?" Emma asked as they reached the parking garage. Victoria smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Sam had seen from her in years. "Next, I'm going to finish my master's degree in nonprofit administration. I'm going to expand my consulting work with domestic violence organizations. I'm going to raise Hope to be strong and independent and kind." Victoria looked at her parents. "And I'm going to spend time with my family, who I missed more than I can ever express." Margaret looked at Sam with an expression he recognized from their early married years, before career pressures and FBI demands had driven them apart. "Sam, what about you? What's next for the former FBI director?" Sam looked at Hope, who was reaching toward him with tiny outstretched arms, clearly wanting to be held by her grandfather. "I'm thinking about teaching, maybe criminal justice courses at the university level, maybe consulting for domestic violence training programs." He took Hope from Victoria's arms, and the baby immediately grabbed his tie and gurgled with delight. "But mostly, I'm thinking about being the kind of grandfather who's present for everyday moments, not just crisis interventions." Victoria watched her father with her daughter and felt tears of gratitude flowing down her cheeks. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Anything." When Hope is old enough to ask about her father, what should I tell her? Sam considered the question seriously, bouncing Hope gently in his arms while she played with his tie. Tell her the truth. Tell her that her father made choices that hurt people, including her mother. Tell her that actions have consequences and that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is above the law. Sam looked at Victoria with love and respect. But also tell her that her mother is one of the bravest people who ever lived. Tell her that when faced with an impossible situation, her mother found a way to protect herself and her child while ensuring that justice was served. Victoria felt something settle in her chest, some final piece of healing that she hadn't even realized was missing. And tell her, Sam continued, that she has a family who loves her unconditionally, who will support her dreams, and who will always be proud of the strong, intelligent, compassionate woman her mother is raising her to become. As they drove home together, to the house where Victoria and Hope had been living with Sam for the past 6 months, Victoria reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that terrible day outside the police station. She'd lost a marriage but gained her freedom. She'd lost financial security, but gained self-respect. She'd lost the illusion of a perfect life, but gained the reality of authentic relationships built on truth and mutual support. Most importantly, she'd gained hope. Not just her daughter, but hope itself. Hope that the future could be better than the past. Hope that love could overcome abuse. Hope that justice could prevail over corruption. Hope that families could heal from years of pain and separation. Hope Victoria Hayes fell asleep in her car seat as they drove through the Boston streets, completely secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by people who would spend their lives ensuring she grew up safe, loved, and strong. And in the front seat, Victoria Hayes, survivor, mother, federal witness, and the bravest person her father had ever known, smiled as she watched the city lights blur past the window, knowing that every single day from now on was a new beginning, built on the foundation of truth, justice, and the kind of love that makes people willing to risk everything for each other's safety and happiness. The perfect life she tried to build with Brad Morrison had been a lie, but the imperfect, complicated, beautiful life she was building with her family was real, and it was just beginning. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button. It helps us reach others who might need to hear Victoria's message of hope and strength. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our stories of real courage and justice. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light.